As you know, that is my name, and the date is March 15th, 2023. So, first, I'd like to go over the agenda. Basically, I'm going to give you a brief introduction of myself and give you the background and history of myself and of part of this research. Then, we're going to go over the abstract, the definitions. I'm going to show you a map of persecution. And then we're going to go through case studies. The case studies I've chosen are artistically rendered. In other words, they're images, whether by myself or others, that depict part of the basis for this presentation. Then we're going to have a discussion, including questions, conclusion, and then if you have any additional questions, please feel free to ask. As I said, my name is Dr. Janelle Christine Simmons. I am the owner or CEO of my own sole proprietorship, where I do consulting and editing for various small businesses, nonprofits, and other types of institutions. My background is that I have an EDD in educational leadership, as well as 3 master's degrees and a bachelor's degree. I'm a published author and actually am finished almost completely with 2 books that are being published within the next month or 2 that are listed here. So the background and the history for this is that as long as man has existed, and there's began to be different families and different religions and different ideologies, there have been religious conflicts and a myriad of different types of religious persecution. And this presentation focuses on images to explore this reality. This paper presentation will focus on religious violence through the lens of a camera. A historical overview for the comparative pictures will take place, and the audience will be asked to consider a few questions. First, is it a particular religion that is violent or man who is violent? Second, does man become violent from seeing something different, or is he naturally violent? Third, is there a difference between one religious group's extremism versus another? Finally, the audience will be asked to take a brief survey that will be utilized for a future paper. This will be verbal. The keywords for the abstract are Judaism, Christianity, Islam, religion, and violence, but are not limited to such. First, let's go through some definitions. Apostasy. This is technically the Christian definition, but it's applicable to all religions. It's the act of departing from one's previous religion by no longer having faith in its creator or its substance. Buddhism. It's a religious based on the teachings of Siddhartha Gautama Sakya, and it's basically based on principles of peace and various stages of position, while negating stages of position. Christianity. It's a religion based on the continuation of Judaism, with a belief in a prophet believed to be a God named Jesus Christ of Nazareth, who is one person of the Trinity. And though the term Trinity is used, it's considered to be a monotheistic religion. Hinduism, one of the 5 major religions, developed over millennia with over 30 million gods, which is polytheistic in nature, and has a belief in the Bhagavad Gita, its basic scripture, and the Kama Sutra. Islam, another monotheistic religion, which means submission, created by Prophet Muhammad in 610 AD, based in the Quran or on the Quran and the Hadith, which is the tradition, so the law and the traditions. Islamophobia, just like anti-Semitism or anti-Christian persecution, etc., as an extreme form of hatred due to one's belief, but it's specific to Islam. Judaism literally comes from various words in Hebrew, which means to praise. In other words, to praise God. It's a monotheistic religious system in Elohim or based in Elohim, and a coming Messiah, which is based on the Torah and the Talmud. Persecution, to undergo severe economic, emotional, and physical damage due to one's belief in God. And the last definition, religion. A belief system that requires belief in a higher power, namely God, has a text that outlines what to believe and encompasses prayer, meditation, and some form of rites of passage. Now, this picture, unfortunately, did not crop properly in PowerPoint, but I left it here to just give an overview. And so, although you don't have the full legend, you can see in the top half of this image that there are government restrictions. This is from the Pew Research Center on Religion and Social Hostilities. And the darker the color, the worse it is. And as you can see, most of the darker colors are in what we call the 1040 region. And religious persecution has become an increasingly higher problem. And if you even look at news clips recently, within even the last week or 2 weeks, anti-Semitism continues to be on the rise. Anti-Islamophobia or Islamophobia continues to be on the rise. And there are various countries with governments that heavily persecute believers within their region. And so if you see the view of the paper and click on that link, you'll have the PowerPoint presentation. But also in the paper, there's a clear image of this image. Now, this is an example, and it's only a handful of examples of what we're looking at today. As you can see to the left, there's an image of Bruce Lee. Most of us know Bruce Lee to be one of the most famous martial artists that ever graced the face of the earth. And this kick right here, this roundhouse kick, is an inversion of the picture you see to the right. To the right, you see a Buddhist monk executing basically the same roundhouse kick as he's fighting off a police officer. And as you know, persecution of Buddhists also has increased recently. So let's begin. Our first case study, genocide. The picture to the left shows an image of bodies that rendered during the Holocaust between the period of 1933 and 1945 throughout Europe, and specifically this image, Auschwitz, being in Poland. The second picture is a picture of Christian persecution in the Sudan, which has gone on for hundreds of years and continues to the present. If you even do a Google search now, you'll see that there have been a lot of church burnings and a lot of people burned to death as well as killed presently. Even though I refer to the Sudan, I'm referring to the North and the South Sudan as Sudan, although they are two separate countries. In the northern part of the Sudan, or North Sudan, it's mostly Muslims now. And the southern part of the Sudan, or South Sudan, there are mostly Christians now. And even so, for some apparent reason, Muslims, whether in North Sudan or South Sudan, have continued to persecute Christians. Mainly now it's more so property, but previously it was a larger extent, and also to spiritist groups, of actual religious persecution, including burning people to death and putting people's babies through stakes. If you look at both images, you'll start to see similarities and differences. Obviously, the first picture is of mostly Europeans, the second of mostly Africans. But when you look at the bodies lined up, I want you to consider, why does violence have to be incorporated with religion? We're going to have a full discussion on this later. Let's go to the second image. Case study number 2. The first image took place in 1963. It was a Baptist church bombing, which was very representative of what occurred during the civil rights movement, because an organization called the KKK, or the Ku Klux Klan, which basically was made up of Caucasians who were Protestant Christians, or at least labeled themselves as Protestant Christians, believed that, as they referred to at that time, Negroes or Blacks were inferior. And so there were a lot of things such as lynchings, rapes, church bombings, house bombings, and the burning of crosses in front of properties that were owned or rented by Blacks or African Americans. And the second image, this is from 2017. You see that this is a Sudanese church that was bulldozed or torn down by Muslims because they wanted to start a business and didn't want the church to be there. Several of these churches have been destroyed, and several of them have at least existed there for over 40 years. As you look at this image, although the people may not necessarily be harmed in both of these images, I want you to think of the importance of the property or the actual physical church as a gathering place for community and family and worship, and consider the physical loss, but also the emotional and spiritual damage that may have occurred. And case study 3. The first photo is a photo of outside of Judson Memorial Church, which is at 55th Washington Square in New York City, which I just took on March 7th. The latter image comes from an article about Rohingya Muslims in areas such as Myanmar. As you can see, this is 6 years apart. But the church in New York is protesting the fact that those who are fighting for democracy are being persecuted and religious minorities are being persecuted. And here in the second image, you see that Rohingya Muslims are protesting and using a legal right to fight for their rights. And I want you to consider what the differences may be in who is the one protesting, who we protest for, what we protest for, and the importance of protest when it comes to religious persecution, and even so worldwide recognition of such. In this fourth, or technically fifth set of photos, to the left, you'll see a rendering of Jesus Christ on the cross. I tried to make it as vague as possible, specifically because some people may consider idolatry to have a rendering of Christ up close. The second picture, you see a Black man that was hanged down south in 1925. The first image is from 2,000 years ago, and the latter image is from about 70, almost 70 years ago. And you can see the base is the same. A tree, a murder, and some form of possible redemption, which we'll discuss later. So when you look at these two images, I want you to consider what would lead to someone being killed on a tree. What is the importance of the tree? What is the importance of hanging and making something a display for all to see and possibly mock the person? And what does it really have to do with one's religion or race? On these last two sets of pictures, on the left, you'll see a image from an article, a newspaper article that I found, and Hindus were fighting for their rights. But in this article, Hindus are protesting for their rights, especially certain citizenship. I was quite slightly confused about why Hindu Indians in India would not have full citizenship. However, in their fight, they're saying that only Hindus, Sikhs, Buddhists, and Jainists should be able to be citizens and have full human rights in India. And so what's happened is, which has been documented, especially within the last month, about actually now it's March, 2 months, is that Christians in India have been heavily persecuted again. And so to the right, just opposed to this image, you see an image of nuns who are protesting and saying, basically, why are you attacking us? Don't kill innocent people. We have nothing to do with you having rights or not having rights. Just because we're Christians, we're not your burden and we're not a curse to you. And so when you look at these two images, I want you to consider they're both protesting, but one in protesting for their rights is also trying to eradicate or annihilate the rights of another group. And then the other group is protesting back, saying that if we have rights, possibly we were born here, we earned them, we legally obtained them, and even if we did not, why would we be your concern? So consider why violence would come up in this way and in this form. So these are some general questions I want to ask and open this up to a brief discussion. First, and we're going to go back to the original questions later. First, what struck you about these images? Is anyone there? Okay. Why do you think there's a rise of hate for all religions? Next question. What did this presentation make you think about? Last question. How can we curb religious violence? Since there's no discussion at the moment, I'm going to go to the conclusion. In conclusion, religious persecution appears to be on the rise. Various references I've utilized describe the violence that has increased towards Jews, Christians, Muslims, Hindus, and even Buddhists, and sometimes the persecution is derived from each of these groups towards one another. Persecution has also increased in communist nations such as China as well. And one of the images previously, which was not discussed, the soul image, there's a man with a brick and he's throwing it. And this is actually Shiite Muslims fighting back against Sunni Muslims because Sunni Muslims said Shiite Muslims are not proper Muslims. And so you can see there's interreligious persecution, and then there is extraneous or separatist persecution from one group to the other of differing religious beliefs. And so it's something to consider. I want to thank you for allowing me to present this. And this is my contact information, my business phone number, my email, my IG account, and my website account. So if you wish to contact me, please feel free to do so. Also, I'd like to share some of the references that were used for this presentation. And now I'm going to go back to.
Thank you for presenting this article.
Mhm.
It was a valuable presentation. If anyone have any questions, ask the presenter.